The wood-lined meeting room grew quiet as Reich Marshal Hermann Goering gave his opinion to German airplane makers. His words, written down by secretaries, would become one of history's most disastrous mistakes. The Americans cannot build airplanes. They are very good at refrigerators and razor blades. Through the tall windows of the Air Ministry, the gathered businessmen could see smoke rising from Berlin's factories, which were working frantically to replace the German Air Force's losses. The Third Reich, although starting to suffer from defeats at Stalingrad and in North Africa, still held sway over most of Europe. In Goering's view, formed by old ideas from the 1920s, the United States was still a country of jazz players and shopkeepers, able to make household items but not weapons of war. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. What Goering was unaware of was that at that exact time, American shipyards were launching 3 Liberty ships every day. By the time his meeting was over, the Richmond shipyards alone would have finished another ship. In 6 months, those Americans who supposedly couldn't construct planes would be sending 1,000-bomber attacks over Germany while their shipyards put out a new cargo vessel every 8 hours. The math of Germany's defeat was being calculated not in strategic plans, but in manufacturing numbers that would soon show the deadly false belief at the core of Nazi strategy. Hermann Goering's disregard for American industrial strength didn't start in 1943. It came from long-held German military beliefs. As a World War I flying hero who shot down 22 Allied planes, Goering had seen America's late and small role in that war. The United States had joined World War I with almost no air force and had to use French and British aircraft. This memory shaped his deadly wrong idea about American abilities. The particular comment about airplanes became Goering's usual answer when asked about America's potential threat. He said similar things all through the early years of the war. In 1940, after France was defeated, he promised Hitler, "The Americans are good about making stylish cars and refrigerators, but that doesn't mean they are any good at making aircraft. They are bluffing. They are excellent at bluffing." This was not just Goering's personal mistaken belief. German intelligence consistently undervalued American potential. In November 1941, Colonel Isef B.O. Schmid, head of German Air Force intelligence, sent in a report claiming that American airplane manufacturing could not go beyond 400 planes a month. His study determined that American factories did not have the precise tools and trained workers needed for military production. German naval intelligence was just as dismissive. In January 1942, a naval captain informed Admiral Raeder that American shipbuilding ability was likely limited to 1 cargo ship per week at each shipyard. "Their workers are soft," he wrote, "used to high pay and short hours. They lack the discipline of German craftsmen." Even Hitler, while acting dismissive in public, privately saw the threat, as he mentioned to his generals in December 1941. "We must defeat Russia quickly. Once that is done, we can deal with America before their production becomes too great." But Goering, in charge of judging enemy air strength, stayed sure of American industrial weakness. Even as Goering kept repeating his dismissive view, America was changing into what Franklin Roosevelt named the arsenal of democracy. On January 6, 1942, in his State of the Union speech, Roosevelt declared amazing production targets. First, to increase our production rate of airplanes so rapidly that in this year, 1942, we shall produce 60,000 planes. The rate of increase will be maintained and continued so that next year, 1943, we shall produce 125,000 airplanes, including 100,000 combat planes. German intelligence picked up these figures. In his journal, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels wrote on January 8, 1942, "The Führer laughed when I showed him Roosevelt's production targets. Pure propaganda. If they could build 1/10 of these numbers, it would be a miracle." What the Germans failed to realize was that America had been getting ready since 1940. The groundwork had been established not with military contracts, but with British money. The British Purchasing Commission, desperate for ships to replace those lost to U-boats, had come to American industrialist Henry J. Kaiser with a bold offer. build 60 cargo ships using mass production methods never before used in shipbuilding. Kaiser, who had never constructed a ship but had finished the Hoover Dam ahead of time, took on the task. His method would change not just shipbuilding, but the whole idea of wartime manufacturing. Instead of skilled shipbuilders making each vessel one by one, Kaiser would use pre-made parts, welding instead of riveting, and assembly line methods taken from car making. The Liberty ship model was intentionally basic. It was a 441-foot cargo ship based on an old British design, powered by a triple-expansion steam engine that any mechanic could fix. When German intelligence got the technical details from a torpedoed Liberty ship in early 1942, they called it crude. Corvette Captain Peter Kramer wrote, "These ships are coffins, slow, clumsy, with the sailing characteristics of a brick." What Kramer didn't get was that the Liberty ship's simplicity was its brilliance. Every part was the same. Every section was made in factories across America and then sent to 18 shipyards where they were put together like giant three-dimensional puzzles. The learning process was fast. Workers who had never seen a ship were making more than veteran German shipbuilders in just a few months. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, was launched on September 27, 1941, after 244 days of work. German naval intelligence saw this with pleasure. At that speed, Americans could build maybe 50 ships a year. What they missed was the quickening pace. The second ship took 180 days. The 10th took 105 days. By January 1942, building time had fallen to 70 days. Then Henry Kaiser made a claim that German intelligence thought was just propaganda. He would build a ship in 10 days. In September 1942, at the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation in Portland, as German U-boats were enjoying their second happy time, sinking 609,000 tons of Allied shipping that month, Kaiser's workers laid the keel of the SS Joseph N. Teal at 12:01 a.m. on September 13th. What happened next was a perfectly planned industrial performance. 3 shifts of workers toiled nonstop. Pre-made sections, some weighing 250 tons, were put into place by huge cranes. Welders, many of them women who had never used a torch 6 months earlier, laid down miles of flawless seams. The workers included homemakers, farmers, and store clerks who had been turned into shipbuilders in weeks. Among them was Wendy the welder, whose real name was Janet Doyle, a former waitress who became one of the fastest welders in the yard. Working with her was Tom Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama who became a master shipfitter, and Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American whose welding speed was better than German standards. On September 23rd at 4:30 p.m., the SS Joseph N. Teal slid into the Columbia River exactly 10 days after her keel was laid. In Berlin, German intelligence shrugged off the news. Admiral Karl Dönitz told his officers, "Even if true, this is a show." They cannot keep up such production, but Kaiser was not done. He declared, "We can do it faster." On November 8, 1942, at 12:01 a.m. in Richmond Shipyard No. 2, California, as German troops retreated from El Alamein, American shipyard workers started a project that would destroy the last bits of German self-assurance. The keel of the SS Robert E. Peary was laid as hundreds of pre-made sections waited in perfect order around the slipway. The whole ship had been constructed before it was constructed. Every piece was made, fitted, and checked in workshops around the yard. Now they would put it together like a massive speed-building show. Kaiser had chosen his top workers for this ultimate effort. The team had Catherine Glasscock, a former teacher who had become one of the quickest welders in the yard, making seams at 35 feet per hour, a speed German welders seldom reached. Richmond Jones, an African-American former sharecropper, operated the main crane so precisely that he could place 250-ton sections within an inch of where they needed to be. Mary Pilosino, a 19-year-old Italian-American, led the electrical team that would install 5 miles of cable in under 20 hours. Hour after hour, the ship came together at an incredible rate. The bottom hull plates were welded on within 6 hours. The side shells were up in 18 hours. By the end of the first day, you could see the shape of a ship. The pre-made deckhouse, with plumbing and wiring already in place, was lowered into position on day 2, a single move that would have taken German shipyards a week. The engine, a 2,500 horsepower steam monster weighing 140 tons, was put in place on day 3. It had been assembled in Toledo, tested, partly taken apart for shipping, and came with engineers who could install it in hours instead of weeks. On November 12th at 3:30 p.m., the SS Robert E. Peary was launched 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after her keel was laid. She was 14,245 tons and would need only a little more work before she was ready for service. The impossible had become normal. The first reliable news reached Berlin in December 1942. German Air Force reconnaissance flights using long-range Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condors brought back pictures that German intelligence first refused to accept. The photos showed dozens of Liberty ships being built at single shipyards. Captain Wilhelm Hiss counted over 200 ships being constructed in the aerial photos. His report, sent on December 15, 1942, warned, if these sightings are correct, American shipbuilding ability is 10 times more than our estimates. The report was hidden. Göring would not admit that his judgment had been wrong. The pictures are misleading, he told his staff. The Americans are showing us the same ships from different angles to make it look like mass production. But U-boat commanders were seeing unsettling changes. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Barton of U-521 noted in January 1943, Convoy HX-222 had 47 merchant ships, all looking brand new, standard models obviously mass-made. Where are these ships coming from? The answer was everywhere. 18 American shipyards were now building Liberty ships. The Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard in Baltimore had 47,000 workers and was launching a ship every 4 days. The California Shipbuilding Corporation was finishing one every 5 days. Workers who had never seen the sea were building ships faster than experienced German craftsmen. By March 1943, American shipyards were finishing Liberty ships at a speed that was beyond German understanding. 3 ships were launched each day. Admiral Donitz's staff calculated that U-boats would need to sink 1.3 million tons a month just to keep up. The best month for U-boats was November 1942, when they sank 729,000 tons. They were already falling behind. Each Liberty ship needed 250,000 different components. The hull itself needed 30,000 separate steel pieces cut to exact sizes. The electrical system used 25 miles of wire. The ship had 3,500 feet of pipes, 2,500 valves, and 350 miles of welding. Yet American workers were putting these complicated machines together in an average of 42 days by mid-1943. The workforce itself went against Nazi racial beliefs. Of the 650,000 Americans building ships, 200,000 were women, Rosie the Riveters, who showed that gender had nothing to do with industrial skill. African Americans, who Nazi ideology called inferior, were running cranes and making welds that were better than German standards. At Kaiser's Richmond yards alone, mixed-race work teams, impossible under Nazi racial laws, were making a ship every 51 hours by May 1943. The diversity was amazing. Chinese-American welders worked next to Norwegian immigrants. Native American riveters from New Mexico worked with Jewish refugees from Germany. Mexican-American women managed crews that included poor white people from Appalachia. This group of supposedly lesser people was outproducing the German master race by amounts that were impossible to figure. In May 1943, at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, Admiral Dönitz stood before Hitler with terrible news. In what became known as Black May, the U-boats had lost 41 submarines while sinking only 50 merchant ships. American shipyards were constructing ships 3 times faster than U-boats could sink them. My Führer, Dönitz reported, the Americans launched 140 merchant ships last month. We sank 41. At this rate, they will have replaced every ship lost since 1939 by the end of the year. Hitler looked at Göring, whose large body seemed to get smaller under his stare. You promised me the Americans could only build consumer products, Hitler said softly, his voice full of the threat that came before his angry outbursts. Göring tried to shift the blame. The ships are of poor quality, my Führer. They will fall apart in storms. Our intelligence reports, your intelligence, Hitler cut in, is useless. The Americans are making more than us in every area. The facts were clear. American factories were making 8,000 airplanes a month. German production, even with Albert Speer's efforts, was at 2,000. American tank production was over 2,000 a month. Germany made 500. The Liberty ships were just the visible sign of an industrial power Germany could never hope to match. On October 4, 1943, Göring made the speech mentioned at the start of this script, still holding on to his denial even as proof grew. He told airplane makers, "The Americans claim amazing production numbers. They say 8,000 aircraft per month. This is of course impossible. Even if true, the quality must be bad. Quantity without quality is worthless." But even as he said it, Göring knew the truth. Air Force pilots reported that American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts were better than German fighters. B-17s and B-24s were showing up over Germany in thousand-plane formations. The inferior American planes were systematically wrecking German cities. General of Fighters Adolf Galland faced Göring after the speech. "Herr Reichsmarschall, I have seen captured American production numbers. They are building 54-engine bombers weekly. That's more fighters than we have in total. Your dismissal of their abilities has doomed the Reich." Göring went back to Carenhall, his hunting lodge, where he comforted himself with the art he had stolen from European museums. The most believable witnesses to American industrial power were the U-boat crews who saw it up close. Captain Lieutenant Heinz Schaefer of U-977 wrote, "By late 1943, the convoys were huge, 80, 90, sometimes 100 ships, most of them new American-built. We would sink one or two if we were lucky, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. For every ship we sank, 3 new ones showed up on the horizon." Lieutenant Herbert Werner, commander of U-415, gave perhaps the most vivid account. "We could see the Liberty ships through our periscopes, painted in fresh gray, their hulls showing the signs of mass production, welded seams instead of rivets, standard deck gear, identical shapes. They came in never-ending lines, each convoy bigger than the last. We started to realize that we were fighting not just ships, but a whole industrial system that could replace losses faster than we could cause them." The emotional impact was terrible. American radio broadcasts announced ship launchings like sports results. German submarine crews gave up counting because the numbers were making them lose hope. By January 1944, American manufacturing statistics were being broadcast as a form of mental warfare. German intelligence could only listen as the numbers were read out. Ships finished in 1943, 1,538 Liberty ships, 203 Victory ships, better versions, 122 tankers, 367 military vessels. Monthly production highs: December 1943, 155 merchant ships launched, 8,689 airplanes delivered, 2,464 tanks completed, 153,000 military trucks made. Wilhelm Zangen, head of the Reich Association of German Industry, told Hitler in February 1944, "The Americans are producing annually 100,000 aircraft to our 25,000, 50,000 tanks to our 19,000, 2.5 million military vehicles to our 100,000, and 2,500 merchant ships to our 200. These ratios are not sustainable for even another year." Hitler supposedly threw the report into the fire, yelling, "Defeatist propaganda!" But the numbers were low. Actual American production in 1944 would be even higher than these estimates. Separate confirmation came from Germany's Japanese allies. Commander Toshikazu Omai, an assistant naval representative in Berlin, sent a coded message to Tokyo in March 1944. "German leadership continues to undervalue American production ability. I have confirmed Americans launched 173 ships in February alone." German officials refuse to believe. Their false belief endangers strategic planning. "I recommend the Imperial Navy assume American production is double German estimates." The Japanese, facing American power in the Pacific, had no such false hopes. Admiral Yamamoto had warned before Pearl Harbor, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." He understood what Göring never did, that American industrial power, once started, was basically endless from an enemy's point of view. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the ultimate show of American industrial strength, German defenders saw a fleet that was beyond belief. 6,939 ships, including hundreds of Liberty ships full of supplies, vehicles, and ammunition. Lieutenant General Wilhelm Richter, leading the 716th Infantry Division, reported, "The sea is black with ships. They stretch to the horizon in every direction. This is not an invasion. It is a migration. Every Liberty ship in that huge fleet stood for 42 days of American industrial work. Every tank that landed was one of 88,410 America would make during the war. Every Jeep was one of 639,245 that would come off assembly lines. The landing craft themselves, thousands of them, had been made in places like Evansville, Indiana, and Quincy, Illinois, by workers who had never seen the sea." Colonel Ernst Goth, defending Sword Beach, later wrote, "We had been told Americans were soft, that their soldiers would break under pressure, that their gear was inferior. But I watched their engineers build a floating harbor in 5 days that was larger than most German ports. Their trucks climbed our beach barriers like mountain goats. Their supposedly weaker fighters cleared the German Air Force from the skies. Even as American bombs fell on Berlin in February 1945, Göring held on to his fantasy. He told his staff, 'The American production figures are inflated. Many ships are probably wooden fakes for propaganda.'" His deputy, General of Flyers Karl Koller, wrote down, "The Reichsmarschall lives in a fantasy. Yesterday, 1,000 American bombers destroyed Luna. He still insists they can't have built so many planes. When I showed him crash bomber serial numbers proving at least 15,000 B-17s and B-24s have been built, he called me a defeatist." The reality was worse. America had made 31,214 four-engine bombers by the war's end, 18,282 B-24 Liberators, and 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses. This single type of plane outnumbered Germany's total aircraft production for the war. When Americans took over the Reich Air Ministry in May 1945, they found Göring's intelligence files. Report after report warning of American strength had been marked unreliable or enemy propaganda in Göring's own handwriting. One report from June 1943 said, "American shipyard in Panama, seen from neutral waters, counted 17 Liberty ships being built at the same time. Estimated finish rate 1 every 3 days. Göring had written, impossible, agent compromised or insane." Another from December 1943 announced the completion of the 1,000th Liberty ship. Göring's note, propaganda. Actual number probably less than 200. Major William Hutchinson, looking at the papers later, wrote, "It was amazing to see how completely the German leaders had fooled themselves. They had correct intelligence but refused to believe it because it went against their racial theories and pre-war ideas." At Nuremberg in 1946, Göring was faced with production numbers: 2,610 Liberty ships, 531 Victory ships, 296,429 airplanes, 88 Ford and 10 tanks, 383,311 military trucks. Göring answered, "These figures show quantity, not quality. We Germans focused on quality over quantity." Prosecutor Robert Jackson then presented a captured German report from 1944, written by Göring's own staff, admitting American airplanes were better in every way: speed, range, weapons, and reliability. Göring was silent. In talks with psychiatrist Dr. Gustav Gilbert, Göring finally admitted, "I underestimated the Americans. I thought they were soft, spoiled by luxury. When I said they could only make consumer goods, I believed it. It was the biggest mistake of my life. They buried us under a mountain of production." Germany's dismissal of American ability had deadly results. Admiral Dönitz kept the U-boat campaign going after it was mathematically impossible to win. Of the 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 28,000 died, a 70% death rate, the highest of any service in any country during the war. These men died trying to sink ships that were being replaced faster than they could be destroyed. The German Air Force, trusting Göring's promises about limited American airplane production, continued offensive actions long after they should have switched to pure defense. The result, 43,000 Air Force personnel killed trying to fight an enemy, making 50 airplanes for every German plane. The U-boats themselves tell the tale. Germany built 1,162 U-boats during the war. They sank nearly 3,000 Allied ships, 175 warships, and 2,125 merchant ships. But the Allies constructed 5,177 merchant vessels. For every ship lost, 2 were built. Numbers don't lie, even when leaders do. Behind the Liberty ships were 18 million Americans working in war production, more people than in Germany's entire armed forces. The Richmond shipyards alone had 93,000 workers at their peak, more than Germany's entire shipbuilding industry. These workers came from all backgrounds, proving Nazi ideas about race and society wrong. Emma Martinez, a Mexican-American welder at Todd Houston Shipbuilding, finished 300 feet of perfect welding per shift, a speed German welders rarely met. Dorothy Luck, a homemaker from Oakland, became a crane operator handling 250-ton lifts. Thomas Washington, an African-American sharecropper from Alabama, became a ship fitter whose work was more precise than German standards. They worked in ways impossible under Nazism: integrated lunchrooms despite local segregation, child care centers for working mothers, clinics with free health care. Workers made $1.20 an hour, more than skilled German workers made in a day. They bought war bonds with their extra money while German workers could be executed for slowing down. The difference was clear. American workers willingly worked overtime for more pay and pride. German factories increasingly used slave labor, workers from conquered lands who deliberately messed up production when they could. While American workers' children went to school, German teenagers were put into anti-aircraft crews. While American workers suggested ideas that made production faster, German workers who pointed out issues risked being shot for being defeatist. Liberty ships showed American creativity that Germany couldn't copy. Welding took the place of riveting, cutting building time by 30% and weight by 600 tons. The method, created by the Lincoln Electric Company, was so advanced that captured German engineers said it was impossible until they saw it done. Pre-making parts reached levels Germany never did. Whole deck houses were built miles from shipyards, complete with plumbing, electrical systems, and furniture. They were moved by special train cars and lifted by cranes that could handle 250 tons, 5 times what Germany's biggest shipyard cranes could lift. The production system itself was groundbreaking. Henry Kaiser brought in assembly line methods where workers focused on specific jobs. A welder might work on the same kind of joint for months, getting a speed and perfection that was impossible with old methods. The learning was so fast that workers who had never seen a ship in July were outproducing veteran German shipbuilders by December. Each Liberty ship needed materials from all over America, delivered with a precision that German logistics officers said was impossible. Steel plates from Pittsburgh came just when they were needed. Engines from Toledo were delivered complete and tested. Electrical generators from Schenectady showed up right on schedule. The railroad system that made this miracle happen moved amazing amounts of goods. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone moved 50 million tons of war materials in 1943, more than Germany's entire rail system, even with slave labor. American railroads did this while still running civilian passenger trains. Major Hans Kahl, a German logistics officer who studied American production after the war, wrote, "We struggled to supply single factories. The Americans supplied whole industries. We counted boxcars. They counted train loads. We planned in weeks. They planned in years." Even as Liberty ships were being made in huge numbers, Americans were making the design better. Victory ships introduced in 1944 were faster, 15 to 17 knots versus 11, bigger and more advanced, yet built almost as quickly, 42 days on average. The Victory ship program showed America's ability to innovate while still mass-producing. New turbine engines replaced old systems. Better hull designs increased speed and capacity. Improved ventilation protected cargo. Enhanced navigation gear improved safety. All of this was done without slowing down production. In contrast, German efforts to improve submarines, the Type 21 program, created chaos. Only 4 Type 21 U-boats were operational by the war's end, while America built 531 Victory ships in 18 months. The economic gap made Göring's dismissal foolish from the start. In 1941, American GDP was $126 billion, Germany's was $35 billion. American steel production was 80 million tons, Germany's 20 million tons. America made 260 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity, Germany made 80 billion. American production grew by 170% during the war. German production grew by only 30% despite Speer's desperate efforts. By 1944, America was spending $90 billion a year on the war, more than Germany's entire pre-war GDP. The Liberty Ship program alone cost $4.6 billion, more than Germany spent on its entire U-boat fleet. Dr. Rolf Wagenfuhr, head of German wartime statistics, figured out after the war, America outproduced Germany 6-1 in raw materials, 8-1 in finished goods, and 12-1 in transportation capacity. We were not defeated. We were buried. American production became a weapon itself. The Office of War Information broadcast statistics to Germany. German soldiers heard America was building a ship every 8 hours, a plane every 5 minutes, a tank every 7 minutes. They didn't believe it until they saw it. Lieutenant Helmut Romer, defending Normandy, wrote, "The Americans announced 10,000 planes for Invasion Day." We laughed. Then the sky turned black with aircraft. Everything they told us was propaganda turned out to be true. Everything our leaders told us was true turned out to be propaganda. Each Liberty ship became a sign of American invincibility. German propaganda tried to make fun of them as ugly ducklings, but crews knew better. As one captured submariner told interrogators, "When convoys of 50, 60, 70 of these ships appeared, we knew the war was lost. Mathematics doesn't lie, even when politicians do." After Germany's surrender, American investigators questioned German industrial leaders about their wartime views. Their answers all condemned Göring's judgment. Fritz Thyssen, the steel tycoon who had helped Hitler come to power, said, "Göring lived in a fantasy. He visited America in the 1920s, saw only speakeasies and jazz clubs, never steel mills or auto plants. His ignorance cost Germany the war." Albert Speer was more critical. Göring's dismissal of American production was criminal neglect. By the time I became armaments minister, it was too late. The Americans produced monthly what took us a year. The Liberty ships were just the visible sign of an industrial power we could never match. Even Alfred Krupp, whose factories had been the pride of German industry, admitted, "We produced the best steel in the world, but in small amounts. The Americans produced good steel in huge quantities. One Liberty ship contained enough steel for 50 Tiger tanks. They built 2,710 Liberty ships. We built 1,347 Tiger tanks. The math is undeniable." Even the Soviet Union, America's ally but ideological foe, was amazed by American industrial output. The Liberty ships became a lifeline not just for Britain, but for the Soviet war effort as well. Marshal Georgy Zhukov wrote in his memoirs, "The Americans gave us 400,000 trucks, 13,000 tanks, 15,000 aircraft, and 17 million tons of supplies. But what truly amazed us were the Liberty ships themselves, delivering these supplies through Arctic waters under constant German attack. Each ship that reached Murmansk represented a victory of American industry over German submarines. Without these ships, we could not have driven to Berlin." Nikita Khrushchev, who managed Ukrainian industrial production during the war, was typically direct. "Without American trucks, we couldn't have moved our artillery. Without American steel, we couldn't have built our tanks. Without American food, we couldn't have fed our army. The Liberty ships brought us everything from boots to telephone wire to Spam. Göring's dismissal of American industry was a gift to us. It meant Germany underestimated the force that was supplying both fronts against them." Soviet Admiral Nikolai Kuznetsov added his view. "We lost many ships to German U-boats in the Arctic convoys. But for every ship sunk, the Americans built 3 more. The Germans could sink ships. The Americans could build oceans of them. The final numbers, the last count, show Göring's terrible mistake. Liberty ships, 2 710 built, 18 shipyards involved. Average construction time, 42 days by 1943. Fastest, 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. Total tonnage, 292,000 tons. Cost, $1.8 million per ship on average. Total merchant ships, 5,177 vessels of all types, 56 million deadweight tons, more than all other nations combined. Shipyard workforce peak, 1.7 million workers, with women making up 35% and African Americans 14%. Average wage, $120 per hour. Comparative production, USA versus Germany, aircraft 296,429 versus 111,767. Tanks 88,410 versus 67,429. Trucks 2,383,311 versus 350,000. U-boat war statistics. German U-boats built 162, U-boats destroyed 785, Allied ships sunk by U-boats almost 3,000, Allied ships built 5,177, net gain almost 3,000 ships. The Liberty ships changed more than just war. They changed society itself. The integration in shipyards, though limited by local laws, set a pattern for post-war civil rights progress. Women proved their industrial skill for good, changing the American workforce forever. Kaiser's healthcare system for workers became Kaiser Permanente, now serving 12 million Americans. Production methods pioneered in the Liberty ship program changed global shipbuilding. Welding replaced riveting everywhere. Pre-making parts became standard. The assembly line idea influenced post-war Japanese and Korean shipbuilders, who would eventually produce more than America using methods Americans invented. Most importantly, Liberty ships showed that democracy could mobilize better than totalitarianism, that free workers made more than slave labor, and that diversity was a strength, not a weakness. They proved Roosevelt's idea of America as the arsenal of democracy. At Nuremberg, awaiting his execution, Göring kept his noble manner but could no longer deny the facts. In his final speech to the court, he completely avoided the topic of American production. His silence was an admission. On October 15, 1946, 2 hours before he was to be executed, Göring killed himself with a cyanide pill. He died finally realizing his delusions. Dr. Gustave Gilbert, the prison psychologist, recorded Göring's last confession about American industry. I should have known. A nation that could build the Empire State Building in 410 days could build anything. But I believed our propaganda about American decadence. The Liberty ships should have been named victory ships from the start. They were our defeat in plain sight. Today, 2 Liberty ships still sail. The SS John W. Brown and the SS Jeremiah O'Brien. They are the last working reminders of history's greatest industrial feat. When they pass the Statue of Liberty on memorial trips, their whistles sound across waters where U-boats once hunted, reminding us of a time when democracy was threatened by those who thought it was weak. Commander Edward Ellsberg, who oversaw salvage work at Normandy, captured what Liberty ships stood for. They were ugly, slow, and simple. But they were there, thousands of them, carrying everything from Sherman tanks to candy bars, from ammunition to blood plasma. They were the bridge between American factories and the fighting fronts. Göring thought Americans could only make consumer goods. He was wrong. We could make anything, including victory. The 2007-10 Liberty ships are monuments to the danger of underestimating a democracy based on bias and old ideas. Hermann Göring's dismissal of American industry as only making consumer products echoes through history as one of the biggest strategic blunders ever made. While he held on to fantasies about American weakness, American workers were proving that in the arsenal of democracy, the only limit was imagination, and the only shortage was of enemies foolish enough to test its power. The Liberty ships were not just cargo vessels. They were 10,000-ton proof that freedom, when fully mobilized, could outproduce tyranny by so much that military genius didn't matter. They showed that wars could be won in factories just as surely as on battlefields, and that those who ignore industrial strength in favor of racial myths do so at their own peril.